Hello and welcome to Between the Lines. I'm Esther Hatch and I'm here with Tracy Hunter Abramson, Sarah M. Eden, and Sean Bessie. And we have kind of a fun, hopefully not too embarrassing episode today. we were together and talking about the funny things that happen during signings and things or like interviews when people talk to us about our books and they have questions for us and we have to do like crash course like studying beforehand because sometimes we don't always remember everything we write. And sometimes we surprise ourselves with things that we have written. So I thought that would be such a fun thing to talk to you guys about. And before we start, I do want to make something very clear. All of us here have written more than one book and have been doing this for a while. So we aren't necessarily really bad at remembering things, but like it does get complicated. So before we start, can you guys all tell us like how many books have you written and how long have you been writing?
Next year I will hit 15 years of being published. In April, I published my 75th book. But in terms of how many I've written, I'm probably approaching 82, 83, something like that.
That's so amazing.
It's ridiculous.
But also amazing.
Yeah. 0 out of 10 stars. I don't recommend
it. So cool.
My first book was published in 2001, and so I have to do the math. I think that means that I've been writing for 23 years. And I am here to counterbalance Sarah and Tracy because I don't write as fast as they do, but I do have over 30 publications and a few more in the pipeline.
Awesome. So I just celebrated my 20th anniversary. So March was 20 years for me. And this year's when my 50th, I think depends on how you count, but I think I'm at 50 now. But as far as how many in the pipeline, I don't remember because I lose track. So it's like I probably have like 7 or 8, between 8 and 10 probably that are kind of in the pipeline active right now. So lots.
That's so
cool. How about you, Esther? What do you got?
I'm the very newest. So I started in 2018. I think I have 12, maybe 13. Like I can never remember when like one's about to come out, if I'm counting that one yet or not.
So yeah, not quite as years. Like that's impressive.
No, it's good. Like you get in the industry and you always want to be faster, but then I have to remember like my first book that never got published took me 2 years. So yeah, definitely improved on that. First of all, publishing them and then doing them faster. So yeah, no, it's great. It's really great. So what are like the most common situations where you feel like, oh no, I have to remember something about my book? And what are the aspects that are hard for you to remember? And where are those things likely to come up?
I think one of the things that's the hardest for me is when I get invited to go to a book club. And for everybody else at the book club, they have literally just read the book. And usually the book that they've read, I have written 3 or 4 books since then that are in different stages of the process. And it is really hard to remember names. I can remember the basic storyline, but remembering names, especially of the secondary characters. And I remember going to one book club where they had read a book that it had been several years since I had written it. And I was trying to tell them something about one of the background characters, and I could not remember her name. And so I finally said, does anyone remember the name of the shopkeeper? And one of the women there seriously looked at me and said, you did that. You did write this, right? I was like, yes, I did. I did write it.
You didn't use a ghostwriter or something?
No, but anyway, obviously, it's like once that book is done and you're moving on to the next one, it's so hard.
Yeah, because your brain has moved on.
Yeah.
Where I've started running into difficulty is when I have a book come out that's part of a series, and I have already written the next book in that series. Because of the schedule I'm on right now, that often happens. To where I have relatively recently finished writing the next one. and my brain cannot remember which plot points happened in which book. And, so people will be talking to me about book 2, and I'm trying so hard not to give spoilers for book 3, but I can't remember what happened in the book because it's so like smushed up in here. So that's where I've been running into difficulty, is when my writing is a book ahead of the book that's just been released. I can't remember what happens where. It's all messed up in there.
And I have all of those problems and then some. So I think part of my challenge is I don't write, a lot of my books I write without the names in them. So like I'll just put a bracket and it'll be like shopkeeper or waiter or things like that. And then afterwards, right before I send my books into the CIA to get cleared, so that because that's one of my quirky things I have to do, I'm like, oh, I have to name all my characters. So I'll spend a day or two just naming all the characters, and then I send it in. So I've probably only read the book a handful of times with the names in it. So I don't even remember. And then trying not to like use the same names again and things like that. So I think that's probably one of my biggest challenges, is just trying to like, what are the names? Like if somebody asks, oh, I love this character, I'm like, could you tell me what book? And then they tell me what book. And sometimes it's like, what was the plot in that one again? Like, it's been so long, especially like Sarah said, when you have the similar series, I'm just like, was there a bomb? Okay, wait, that doesn't limit it that much, or how many kidnappings were there? Like, anyway, so it gets a little confusing. So I have gotten a little better in that if somebody like emails me and asks me a question, I have a group on Facebook called Tracy's Friends, and I will put the question out there. So thank you to all of you who helped keep me sane. But I know at one of our recent signings, somebody stopped and they said, oh, what book is this? And I was like, well, it's either this one or this one. She's like, and it's just like what happened to Sean. Like, don't you know? No, I really am not sure. So I try. It's just like I said, some of these we have not read for over a decade. Yeah, because we've been busy writing the next ones.
Yeah, I agree. Like when you guys talked about book clubs and signings, and when people ask you those questions and you feel like you should be the expert because you wrote it, like those are like the times where I get like the most nervous. But it's interesting to me how much it comes up also just in my writing, where I have to write the next book in the series and I don't have a binder like Sarah.
I have that problem too.
And so I actually had one book, I think I've mentioned this on a different podcast episode, where it almost went to print and the main character had the wrong color of eyes in it because I had forgotten that I had mentioned his eye color in a previous book. So luckily, and it was totally random that I figured it out because somebody sent me a peg doll that they had painted, and this character's eyes were green, and I hurried and wrote back to her and I said, why did you paint his eyes green? Can I just ask you a question? And she's like, because they are green, it says so right here. And I'm like, oh, okay. Find it way. So it comes up not just, I think like I'm always most embarrassed when it's with readers, when things like that come up, but I think it even can come up just in our work and as we're trying to move forward and remember all the things if we're writing series and things like that, especially.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think there is one fun positive side to this though. And it's been one of the fun things for me as a writer is that sometimes I get to read something I've written and be surprised by it or see a quote or something like that and think, oh, who wrote that? That's a really good quote. And then you're like, oh, it was me.
Genius.
I know, right? I totally agree with that. But so I would love to hear, because it really has been one of my favorite things in writing. I would love to hear your stories of, have you been surprised pleasantly by something that you've written before?
So most of the time, if somebody says it's a really good quote from one of the Falcon Point books, I just assume it wasn't me. So that makes it really Sean said that. I think all of us have those moments. Like I think probably some of my favorite ones were the beginnings of my Saint Squad books, because like I had a couple of just fun lines that like probably one of my favorites was in Free Fall, where it was something along the lines of, Amy Whitmore, or Amy's dad was going to kill her, assuming that terrorist across the room didn't take care of the job for him first, or something along those lines. And I remember every time I was like, oh my gosh, that was actually pretty good. How did that happen? And obviously the Lord was kind, so that's how it happened. But I think probably my other favorite one, it wasn't that long ago. Some of us, Esther not included, don't love kissing scenes. And so I was complaining online about, I have to write a kissing scene. I'm terrible at this. And I think Sean and Sarah may have pitched in, and there might have even been people saying, call Esther, you should have her help. And then somebody called me out and they're like, I just read In Harm's Way and you had a great kissing scene in there. And I was like, I did? So, and I know Sarah's had those moments, and I know Sean has too, where it's like, oh, that was a really good kissing scene. And we all just kind of shake our heads going, really? Like, it was so painful. How could it have been good? So I think that's probably one of my favorites. But literally, as I'm complaining, somebody called me out on the book that had just come out and was totally, was like, oh yeah. And I read it again. I said, actually, you know what? It wasn't that bad. It's not bad when I'm reading it. The writing was extremely painful, but
Excruciating. Anyway. Yeah.
Excruciating is good.
You like how she says we've had those moments where our scenes receive compliments, like it's ever happened to some of us more than once. I can think of one, guys, and it was because I was challenged by other authors to write a good kissing scene.
We should be doing that more.
Clearly. I mean, for those of you joining us in podcast land, I just cringed. Yuck. I think for me, those moments where I'm pleasantly surprised by something I didn't remember writing often are times when something I've written, kind of like Tracy was saying, makes me laugh. The thing about not necessarily a joke you've written, but a quip or a funny bit of dialogue, once you've written it and rewritten it and edited it, it kind of loses some of its humor because it's not new, because you know what's coming, you know the punchline. So I love those moments when I come back to something I've written and it's still funny. Because you go, okay, this one works. This was good. I think the most favorite thus far time when this has happened, it was filming for the Seeking Persephone movie, because so much of the dialogue in the screenplay came directly out of the book. And that book has been out in the world for, I don't know, 15, 16 years, something like that now. It's been a long time, right? So I've read it a million times. I know all of the dialogue in it. Converting it from a book to a screenplay, I was tearing apart all of the dialogue and the scenes. You know, it's like that. Once you've done enough edits, you kind of hate a book because you've just torn it apart so much. So I was so deep into it, it was kind of hard to look at things through fresh eyes. But sitting there on set, watching a scene play out, and have moments where something I wrote being delivered by talented actors and filmed by a talented director made me laugh out loud. And other people on set have to work very hard not to ruin a take by laughing. That was a cool moment where I thought, I wrote that and it works and it's funny. So that was one of my favorite moments of, wow, did I really write that? Because it worked, and that was kind of a magical thing.
No, I love that. I haven't had that experience, but I'm like you, Sarah, and I love when I go back and read something that I haven't read for a long time and it still evokes an emotion, whether it makes you laugh, it makes you cry. That's when I feel like I've done it right. And sometimes I will go back and read a little section and kind of fall in love with the character again. Somebody who might be quirky, or a child that just kind of pulls at your heartstrings, or somebody who just is good, and you're just so grateful that person is kind of alive. You created this person, and it just warms your heart. So anytime that it touches you emotionally, that's when you feel like it's a happy moment.
Yeah, I love that. I think it makes us all feel like just, oh, I am maybe good at this, which sadly
and we
all
moments.
Need that. Yeah. I still remember two very distinct examples that just make me smile to this day. of this particular thing happening. But the first one was my second book to release, and I had read that book so many times, and I think what had happened is I was able to slip in one more joke, maybe on like my last read through. And so I was reading through it for something else, and I got to that joke, and I had totally forgotten I had put it in. And so I still remember what it was. It was like a forced marriage, but the man was like upset about it, but she was kind of more okay with it. And so she thought it was all going to be okay. And he's like going to leave after they're married. And she makes the joke because his family's always teased him about his knobby knees. And she just says, I'm sure your family was joking about your knobby knees. Like that's the reason he's leaving and not wanting to be married. So I don't know, like I came upon that joke and I was just like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. And it made me laugh, and I didn't know it was coming. And I think that was like the biggest part about it, is just like it was a total surprise to me because I'd totally forgotten. And so I love that one. The other one that was really funny that happened to me is the next book in that same series had just gone out to all the readers on my street team. And so around that time is when you'll start getting your first reviews, the first time people post online about it. And the very first graphic, like people will make little cute graphics. I love it when they do it. And they'll put a quote from the book in it. And the very first thing that came up on that book was a quote that said, "This is Miss Smith. She does not have chlamydia." And I was like, what? And it took me a split second to remember. And it was just one of those weird things that happened where she ends up having to wear a wig. And I was researching why someone would wear wigs, because they weren't popular in the Regency era anymore. And one of the reasons you would wear a wig is if you had chlamydia and your hair had fallen out. So anyway, but like to have that come up as like the first quote to ever be posted online about my book. And I had totally kind of spaced that it was in there. It was so funny. So thank you to people who review and put out quotes for us to laugh at and feel like, oh, that I can't believe I wrote that. I actually can't believe I wrote that one. But yeah. So thanks so much, guys. I've loved hearing all the fun things about things that you found. And I especially am jealous of Sarah getting to actually watch people act out her book. I think that would be
pretty cool.
Like, enjoyment on another level of like, wow, I can't believe I did that. So for those of you listening at home, what are some surprising things that happened to you in your life, in your work or your home life? We'd love to hear about that. And thank you so much for listening, and join us again next time on Between the Lines.